Well, here we are in Judges chapter 13, and it would probably be helpful as we get into these verses. So we're going to begin in verse 8 this morning, but in Judges chapter 13, it's really a continuation of where we were last week in verse 1, starting in Judges 13:1, and the Lord coming to the wife of this man Manoah in Israel. So maybe I'll just read quickly to kind of catch us up to speed, verses 1 through 7. So Judges 13, starting in verse 1, "Now the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, so that the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines 40 years. There was a certain man of Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had borne no children." So just to recap, we're talking about the tribe of Dan right here, and they're on the front lines with the Philistines. So this is a strategic location and family that God is working in at this time. But their situation is that they had not been able to have children. Verse 2, and then verse 3, "Then the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, 'Behold, now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and give birth to a son. Now therefore, be careful not to drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. For behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the boy shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb. And he shall begin to deliver Israel from the hands of the Philistines.' Then the woman came and told her husband, saying, 'A man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of the angel of God, very awesome. And I did not ask him,'" that was a little strange, "and I did not ask him where he came from, nor did he tell me his name. But he said to me, Behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and now you shall not drink wine or strong drink or eat any unclean thing, for the boy shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb to the day of his death." So as we looked at this passage last time, we noted a few things that we want to revisit quickly. First of all, in Israel at this time, the time of the judges, the evil in the nation just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. So it's just this downhill slide, this spiral downward, and you read and you wonder, well, where do we find hope in this? And where do these poor people find hope? And to a certain extent, things would get bad enough and they would cry out to the Lord, or in this instance, things were very bad and they didn't cry out to the Lord. So there was no cry to help, and instead of crying out to the Lord, because of this heavy burden that they're under of this Philistine oppression, the Israelites seem to simply be accepting their daily reality, their misery of Philistine oppression. And we get this from Judges chapter 15, where they actually were upset with anybody, Samson in particular, who wanted to rock the boat. But God, in his grace and in his mercy, decides he's going to intervene and he's going to deliver them anyway out of this oppression. So we're met here in chapter 13, at the beginning of the chapter, by the angel of the Lord, verse 3, who comes and appears to this unnamed woman, the wife of Manoah, of the tribe of Dan. And so we noted a few things about the angel of the Lord. An angel in Scripture is a messenger. That's what the word angel means. And so it's a heavenly messenger sent with a message to deliver. And the angel of the Lord is called by God's personal name, Jehovah, in a number of instances. He always carried God's attributes. He came with God's purpose, spoke with God's words, and he spoke in first person, was recognized and revered as God, and had the ability to forgive sins. So you start to put all these attributes together, and you start to get a picture of who the angel of the Lord is. So you have on one hand the angel of the Lord being distinct from the Lord, in that in Zechariah chapters 1 and 3, you have the angel of the Lord actually praying to the Lord. And then you also have, at the same time, the angel of the Lord speaking for the Lord. And we saw that back in Judges chapter 6. The angel of the Lord speaking means that God is speaking. And so you have what really starts to come into view when it comes to the angel of the Lord is that you have this concept of one God, multiple persons. So we know that as the Trinity. And so some of the Jewish rabbis through the years would have to go to great lengths to come up with alternate explanations for some of these things. But the Old Testament concept of the Trinity is in view here, and when we add it all up, the angel of the Lord has to be the second member of the Trinity, God the Son, appearing in visible bodily form and then disappearing again and again throughout the Old Testament, 59 times throughout the Old Testament. And so this is an important message that God is delivering to this woman, the wife of Manoah. And what he tells her is incredible. He tells her that even though she has not been able to give birth so far in her life, that she's going to give birth. And so this is an astounding message, and one that's also in just the way God works. And we noted this last time, that God so many times works in the most unlikely and unexpected ways, and sometimes he uses the weakest and most seemingly insignificant in the world to accomplish mighty things, even through the birth of just a small baby. He can use the birth of a baby to really change the world, and that's what we're going to see here through Samson. This is going to be the start of the reversal of fortunes here in Israel at this terrible time in their history, the time of the Judges. But that's not all. But just wait, because it gets a lot better. And you know, you fast forward, and by the time you get to 1 Samuel, things really start heating up, and you really see what God is doing and what he has been doing all along. And this is, in a certain sense, a big part of that, because with the birth of Samson, it's like a punch back against the oppression that the nation of Israel is under. And this is the kind of the first strike is going to come through this small baby, Samson. And so the reversal of fortune, we have not only individuals, but also people and people groups and nations. In the Old Testament, the image of the barren woman came to represent Israel itself, basically scattered, helpless, without hope, and then God intervenes. God is the God who remembers, who delivers, who restores, rescues, helps, redeems, and does the miraculous. And he brings new life where there was none to begin with, to new people and new places experiencing despair. I think that's one of the greatest things that God does, is when he brings new life. There's the image of in culture of the phoenix rising from the ashes, and that's really the business that God is in, is bringing new life where there was none. So we noted a few things last time. Also in verses 6 and 7, we saw that Manoah's wife, then she goes to share the news with her husband, and she's at a loss trying to describe the man who visited her. She says he was a man of God. She understands that much. A term normally applied to the prophets in the Old Testament, Moses and Samuel and David. And she says that his physical appearance was impressive and that he might be an angel sent from God. But, and this is important, we noted last time that she fails to give her husband some critical piece of information. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically, when we look at it, we're going to analyze this morning some of what we see in Manoah and his wife as parents. And there are some things that stand out, but overall, they seem to be godly parents living in the midst of a broken, ungodly world at a terrible time in Israel's history. So that kind of sets our context for this passage this morning. And so just looking here at verse 3, if you want to look down there, Judges 13, verse 3, it says, "Then the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman, and said to her, Behold now, you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and give birth to a son. And so the first thing that we ought to note here this morning is this, is that we don't want to miss God's miracle. So the angel of the Lord appears to Manoah's wife, to tell her that God has intervened in her life and in her body. And against all odds, a miracle would have to take place in her. She hadn't been able to have children. And by an act of God alone, her childlessness would be reversed and she would give birth to a son. Yet Manoah's wife's, what we observe here is a lack of reaction. I mean, it's not the reaction of Elizabeth. It's not the reaction of Mary. It's a very lacking reaction. Indicates that she may have missed in all of this the miracle itself. God can defy all odds and all conventional wisdom. The saying, it would take a miracle, is just the kind of phrase that God sets up to powerfully demonstrate his supernatural ability to accomplish the impossible. And our job is to recognize the miracle and publicly praise God for it. So she, in the midst of all this, there's a lot of information, and she seems to kind of miss grasping the significance of what God is doing. And by way of application, I think that we sometimes do that ourselves, in that we can maybe find an alternate explanation. And of course, maybe other people or just the culture are quick to gravitate toward just, I'm sure that, things just happened in such and such a way where circumstances came together and that was, what happened. And in a case like this, you never know what's going on in the human body, and I'm sure that, there's some kind of explanation. But what we know is that this was the work of God in this instance, because the angel of the Lord comes to her and tells her this is what's going to happen, and then it happens. So when God is doing something, maybe you've been praying about something, and it seems impossible, and people are telling you it can't be done and it's impossible, and you need to just move on or whatnot. And then when God does the impossible and he makes a way and he makes it possible and he overcomes those things, and you recognize that God has done the impossible, it's important to give him the glory for that. The next thing we observe here comes just these next verses. So the angel delivers her this message, starting in verse 4. Now therefore be careful not to drink any wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. And so you start to see, this is an interesting set of requirements. Where is this going? Verse 5, For behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines. So there's that really critical piece of information, that final clause of verse 5. He shall begin to deliver Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Then the woman came and told her husband, saying, A man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of the angel of God, very awesome. And I didn't ask him where he came from, nor did he tell me his name. But he said to me, Behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and you shall not drink wine or strong drink or eat any unclean thing, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. So what we have here is that we don't want to miss, and that seems to be what's happening here, what God is doing. So the angel of the Lord tells Manoah's wife God's mission and purpose for this baby that's promised that she's going to give birth to, her son. Her son would be dedicated to the Lord's service, and that's the idea of the Nazarite vow. And in this case, he would be prescribed by God to be under this vow for a lifetime vow, from birth till death, for the specific purpose of beginning to deliver the nation of Israel from the burdensome oppression of the Philistines, there we go, from the Philistines. And Samson, what we observe from him, though, is that he grew up apparently never having an understanding of this. He never understood what God was doing and his role in God's plan of this critically important mission. Manoah's wife, it seems, was so focused on what she was being asked to do by this angel of the Lord that she missed what God was going to do through her son. So God's will for us is that we don't miss his instructions, that we don't fail to learn the lessons he is teaching, which are designed to increase our faith and do a lot of other things, or fail to apply the instructions he gives us. We never want to fail to grasp the larger picture of what God is doing and how he will use us to accomplish his purposes. So at the end of the day here, what we're starting to observe is that her go-to thing that she latches onto, that the angel tells her, is what the expectation is, what she needs to do. Make sure you're careful to do this and this and this and this. And so, she jumps into a mindset of one that we see seeping into sort of the Israelite culture, and by the time you get to Jesus' day, it's fully entrenched as the go-to, right? It was Pharisaic Judaism was the thing, and it was all about what to do and lists and make sure of what to do and what not to do and make sure other people aren't doing this or that. And it was just, a whole slew of kind of what turned into a lot of legalism. And so that's where her mind goes, and that's not a bad thing. Obedience is a very good thing. But she's focused, laser focused on what she needs to do, and she recites to her husband, "This is what I've been asked to do." The reason is because it goes along with the Nazirite vow, Numbers chapter 6, and our child is going to be a Nazirite, and she gets the what, she gets what she's being asked to do, but in the midst of it loses sight of the bigger picture of God's mission, what this is designed to accomplish, what her son is going to accomplish, what God is doing in their nation, and how this child is going to be a part of that. So what I want to emphasize here is that this is a really great application point for all of us, because the two components are important. So understanding God's authority, important. Obedience, important. God's commands, important. But also, what's the bigger purpose? What is maybe God's design, God's intention, the principles behind it? What's the bigger purpose? And as parents, as grandparents, as people who have vocations, wherever we and whatever we find ourselves doing, we have an opportunity to communicate to our children, to understand ourselves and to apply ourselves in such a way that we understand that we can be used of the Lord to accomplish his purposes. We're his vessels, his servants. And it's important to, maybe when it comes to child rearing, Holly and I were just talking about this, kind of got us thinking, to communicate not only the what we're doing, and that's easy to focus on. We're doing this and this and this and this. We're making these our priorities. We're making sure of this, not doing that, other things. But ultimately, what's the goal in all this? What are we trying to accomplish as parents, as grandparents, as teachers, as employees? Where's this going? What's the rationale behind this? What's the mission? And for all of us, how do we fit into what God is doing? How can we be used of him? How can we carry out his purposes for this time and place in history? And he will use us to accomplish really big things if we have a mindset and an understanding of what he's doing and how he designs us to fit into the bigger purpose. So some good takeaway application for all of us. And then let's back up and talk about just what, obviously takes the focus here is the Nazirite vow. It comes from Numbers chapter 6. We'll put this slide back up here that we looked at last time. It was ordinarily taken voluntarily, only for a limited time. Samson's was lifelong and was prescribed by God, so it was a little bit different. And while it was in effect, there was three things that the person under the Nazirite vow was not to do: During the time of the vow, they were to not touch or consume anything that related to the vine. So, wine, vinegar, grape juice, etc. Also included strong drink or fermented drink, which we would readily associate as beer, given the context and the semantic domain with that particular word, sakar, with the usage of the word in other languages nearby. Couldn't cut the hair for the length of the vow and couldn't come near any corpse. And then if we take it to the next level of, well, sort of why or what was this designed to be in association with, we can see this, the significance of this, not to eat or drink anything from the grapevine or the untrimmed vines. There in Leviticus chapter 25, there's a reference to that as well. So basically, it's an interesting kind of association between like kind of untrimmed hair, untrimmed vines. It's an interesting picture here. But signified a total disassociation from intoxicating beverages. That's the clearest we can understand of what is the purpose of all of this, is that not only were they not to drink fermented drinks during the time they were under this vow, but they really weren't to have anything to do with it in terms of just eating grapes or, drinking grape juice or anything like that. Dr. Ron Allen, just a fantastic Bible scholar, wonderful man. He currently lives in Oregon. In some of his commentary work, he says this, that's that last phrase there under point A, the Nazirite couldn't even smell the cork as it was, just to really have nothing to do with alcoholic beverages. And the most common in that day and culture would be wine, so that's where the focus turns to. Number 2, not to trim or style the hair, signified a total disassociation from normal hairstyling or vanity. So people would typically do something with their hair. They would, put it in a certain way, just like we all do. We do something with our hair, and this was a disassociation from that. It was other biblical instructions. Leviticus 19 talk about not engaging in extreme hair or beard trimming or styling associated with paganism. And so I think this just really removes the Nazirite just completely away from that. And so these are very taking it to the farthest distance from certain things that you can go. And then number 3, not to touch or be near death, signified a total disassociation from death and decay. And what we know about this is obviously God is the God of life. And we see that theme recurring through Scripture. And he will, Psalm 16, not let his Holy One see decay. So a powerful picture here in all of these things that the Nazirite was to disassociate from. And of course the hair, the unkept hair, would become the symbol most readily associated with a Nazirite. They were easy to spot because they had the long, stringy, unkept, whatever kind of hair it was. And they weren't to cut it. So there's a little bit about the significance of the Nazirite vow. Let's look at our verses here, starting in verse 8 this morning. It says, Then Manoah entreated the Lord and said, O Lord, please let the man of God whom you have sent come to us again, that he may teach us what to do for the boy who is to be born. So the first thing that we note here about Manoah is he doesn't seem to be a polygamist. We're not told about he has all these wives, he has all these children. He seems to have, from what we gather, taken seriously God's design for marriage and family. So that's a great thing that we observe there. We also see, this is really the first thing that we see from Manoah, is he prays. So he's got a spiritual life, he's got a perspective of the Lord, and he prays to the Lord. So we see some good things right off the bat. But backing up just a little bit, again, verses 6 through 7, Manoah's wife, when she shares the news with him, she leaves out this very important detail. She kind of leaves him in the dark by not telling him about the mission and purpose which their child would be sent to accomplish. And so he's trying to get more information. So he prays and he says, Lord, will you send this man of God, this important prophet or whoever he is, back to us so that we can ask him some more, and specifically teach us what we shall do for the child who will be born. So he like his wife, he wants to know what are the expectations? What do you want from me? What do you want me to do? What can I do? What should I do? Which is not a bad thing, but there might be something missing as well. So let's look at verse 9. And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came to the woman again. This is interesting. He comes to his wife as she was sitting in the field, but Manoah, her husband, was not with her. So this is curious because Manoah prays that the angel would return to us, and the angel returns only to his wife. Now this may be a reflection on the fact that he's missing vital information, and this is kind of a subtle reminder, I'm back. Why am I being summoned to, by prayer, come back and give more information when I've already given you all the information? And then look at verse 10. Then the woman ran in haste and told her husband and said, "Look, the man who came to me the other day has just now appeared to me. He's back." And then in verse 11, so Manoah arose and followed his wife. When he came to the man, he said to him, "Are you the man who spoke with this woman?" And he said, it's ayin, it's ani in Hebrew. It's ani. It's kind of a curious word. It's the pronoun I. He identifies himself. It's rendered here I am. It's probably not the best rendering in English, but basically he identifies himself, something to the effect of, "Yeah, I'm him." So the angel answers in maybe a slightly unusual way here in Hebrew, and it could indicate that the angel of the Lord is a tiny bit annoyed at this point. Let's look at verse 12. Manoah said, "Let your words come to pass." He really wants to know, what will be the boy's rule of life and his work? He follows up his earlier question of, what do you want me to do? So, what is he going to do? How should this child be raised? And what should he do? What should his life's work be? Because he has a mission. He just doesn't know about it. He's been left in the dark. So what we have here is that the angel, Manoah asks this question, and he's not really going to get it answered, unfortunately. And I think the reason for that is that God had already given sufficient information. So the angel of the Lord had told his wife what she needed to know, what she needed to do, what the Nazirite vow for her son was to be, and the bigger mission and purpose for which he was going to be on the scene at this time in Israel's history. In addition to that, Manoah's asking some parenting questions. And if you go over to Deuteronomy chapter 6 and chapter 7, and you can just read through those chapters, God had given parents in Israel adequate instructions for how they were to raise their children. And it wasn't really complex. It wasn't rocket science. And so Manoah just needed, he was asking questions that had already been answered in a sense. So instead, the angel of the Lord tells Manoah that in the next verse that he's already given all the information to his wife that he's needing, and that she needed to pay close attention to what was already told to her. So here's another takeaway for us. Manoah's focus really was on what he needed to do for God by way of his raising the Nazirite son, and maybe that was a little bit overwhelming for him, understandably, that the angel had promised. But like his wife, he missed the powerful thing that God was about to do through his son. So God's will for us is that we don't become so self-focused on what we do for God that we lose sight of what he is going to do through us to accomplish his purpose and plan in ministry. And there's so many ramifications for this. The work that we do for the Lord is important, and we're called to do it. But sometimes we can have an unhealthy self-focus on what we need to do for God, and that we miss out on what he is doing, what he's doing in and through and for us, and how we're a part of that. And so we got to keep it all in its proper focus and balance. And so continuing on so our caution here is to be cautious about self-focus, because that's what we get from Manoah and his wife, is that they were godly individuals, and they desperately wanted to do right by the Lord, but in their zeal to do things for the Lord, they seem to have actually kind of missed the bigger purpose and plan of what he's doing. Looking at verse 13. So the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "Of all that I said to the woman, let her be careful." So basically, I've already given her everything. The angel of the Lord here could sound mildly annoyed, telling Manoah that he's already explained it all to his wife and he just needs to go talk to her. She may not eat anything that comes from the vine, nor may she drink wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean, all that I commanded her to observe. Then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "Please let us detain you, and we will prepare a young goat for you." Again, he's wanting to be hospitable. We see some great qualities here from Manoah. He seems like a godly man. The angel of the Lord responds, verse 16, saying to Manoah, "Though you detain me, I will not eat your food, but if you offer a burnt offering, you must offer it to the Lord." For Manoah did not know at this point, he still didn't know that he was the angel of the Lord. So normally, this is interesting. This sets up what's about to happen. But he doesn't want to stay and eat, and instead he gives permission to offer a burnt offering. Now, at this point in Israel's history, this would normally have to take place again at Shiloh, just like we saw with Jephthah. This offering you'd have to go to the tabernacle, which was at this time in Shiloh, and meet with the priest and offer the correct offering. However, special permission is granted here for Manoah to offer this offering right where he is, right there at his home, using a large rock as the altar. Verse 17, then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, what is your name? And when your words come to pass, how may we honor you? So he still thinks, this is maybe some kind of a prophet sent from the Lord, and he just needs to take down his name, his information, and when this comes to happen, and he fully believes it, so in his credit, he says when, not if. He believes that these words are going to come true. How may we, meet together with you again? Then we're going to have to meet up, and we'll get more information going at this point. This is kind of a natural response from Manoah, because he's still not grasping that this is the angel of the Lord. Verse 18, and the angel of the Lord said to him, why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful? Now, this is an interesting word, wonderful. The Hebrew root word, pele, means wonderful, marvelous, extraordinary, and throughout the Old Testament, it is used only of God, that he is or does things that are extraordinary, that are wonderful. It applies to God alone, this word. For example, if you go to Psalm 139, you have a description of, in fact, maybe we'll just turn there. A wonderful passage, Psalm 139, of God's knowledge, of God's wisdom. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You have, and you know when I sit down, and when I rise up. You understand my thought from afar. You scrutinize my path and my lying down, and are intimately acquainted with my ways. Even before there is a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. You have enclosed me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too, here's our word, wonderful for me. It is too high, I cannot attain it. So speaking of God's knowledge as in the same term, extraordinary, wonderful. And if you go down a few verses 13 through 16, you have formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written, the days that were ordained for me, yet when as yet there was not one of them. So here in these verses we see God's skill at creating, molding a baby in its mother's womb, described in the same term as wonderful. Another really fascinating passage as we're drawing ever closer to the Christmas season, Isaiah 9:6, where we have this description of the Messiah to come, and one of the descriptions is Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Father of Eternity. So the same word is used to clearly identify the deity of the Messiah to come. Therefore, we can conclude that the use of this specific word in the angel's self-description of himself clearly indicates, he says, you can't know my name because it's too wonderful, that he intentionally associates himself with the Lord. So a clear association being drawn for us through the use of this word. Verse 19. So Manoah took the young goat with the grain offering and offered it upon the rock to the Lord. And he did a wondrous thing. Now this is the same word, same root word. While Manoah and his wife looked on. So the angel here performs a wonder. He performs wonders, the same Hebrew root word, pele. It's been said here then, so you have the self-described wonderful one doing wonderful things. They're watching him perform these wonderful things, and then they're watching as he's about to do something particularly spectacular. And it happened as the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. When Manoah and his wife saw this, they fell on their faces to the ground. This is too incredible to witness. This is the only instance in the Bible of an angel disappearing into heaven through the fire from the altar. This is an incredible miracle. I think if we just put ourselves in their shoes, they have this kind of mysterious person in their midst. He identifies himself with God. He starts doing miraculous things, and then he jumps into the fire and ascends right up into heaven. This would be astounding. Just trying to wrap our minds around this thing would be mind-blowing, and according to their response, a bit frightening, because it all comes together in this moment. They have their aha moment when the angel of the Lord, verse 21, appeared no more to Manoah and his wife once the angel was gone out of sight. Then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. So it all comes together, and finally in this moment they recognize who they've been speaking with, who has delivered this message, whose presence they're in. And it awes them, it frightens them, and verse 22, it scares them. And Manoah said to his wife, "We shall surely die because we have seen God." And that wasn't an unreasonable expectation. However, his wife, thankfully, verse 23, says, nah. She puts the pieces together. She does the math. She makes the connection. She puts the puzzle pieces all together, and she says to him, "If the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted our burnt offering as a grain offering from our hands. He would not have shown us all these things, nor would he have told us such things as these times." So basically, if he's told us this is going to happen, and if he's going to keep his promise, then he can't also kill us. So she is the voice of reason in the midst of this very spectacular and somewhat frightening situation. So as we, kind of conclude here for this morning, I don't want to in any way leave us with the impression that what we do for the Lord as we seek to serve and obey Him is unimportant. It is very important. However, it can at times be a stumbling block if that's where our focus gets out of balance on, I need to do this, and I need to do this, and I need to do this, and I must stay away from doing this and this and this, and it gets into the area of legalism. Now, the other end of legalism, antinomianism, is not healthy either. But we don't want to get too caught up in what we need to do for God. I just need to keep doing and doing and doing more and more and more and more, and lose sight of what He is doing and what He's doing in and through us.